June 323 BC. A 32-year-old king lay dying in Babylon after conquering most of the known world. History calls him invincible. History says he never lost a battle. But when you examine the actual evidence, a very different picture emerges. For over 2,000 years, we've been told the story of Alexander the Great, the undefeated conqueror, the military genius who never lost a battle, the man who built an empire stretching from Greece to India. But here's what's interesting. When you actually dig into the primary sources, the archaeological evidence, and the accounts written by historians who lived closer to his time, you start to see cracks in this perfect image. There were military setbacks. There were strategic failures. There were moments when his own army refused to follow him. So if you want to know what really happened, not just the legend, but the actual historical facts, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Today, we're going to look at the real evidence and separate the myth from the history. Let's talk about the actual Alexander. Chapter 1. The Early Years. Alexander was born in July 356 BC in Pella, the capital of Macedon. His father was Philip II, who had transformed Macedon from a minor kingdom into the dominant power in Greece through military reforms and political strategy. Philip had multiple wives, which was common for Macedonian royalty. Alexander's mother was Olympias, a princess from Epirus. Ancient sources describe her as intensely religious and ambitious for her son. She claimed the family descended from Achilles on her side and Heracles on Philip's side. When Alexander was around 13 years old, Philip hired Aristotle to tutor him. For approximately 3 years, Aristotle taught Alexander and other young Macedonian nobles at a place called the Temple of the Nymphs at Mieza. The curriculum likely included philosophy, literature, science, and medicine. At age 16 in 340 BC, Philip left Alexander as regent while he campaigned against Byzantium. During this time, a Thracian tribe called the Maedi rebelled. Alexander led a military force, defeated them, and established a settlement called Alexandropolis. This is the first documented independent military action by Alexander. In 338 BC, at 18 years old, Alexander commanded the companion cavalry at the Battle of Chaeronea, where Philip's army defeated a coalition of Greek city-states including Athens and Thebes. Ancient sources credit Alexander's cavalry charge with helping secure the victory. Then came a family crisis. Philip married another woman, Cleopatra Eurydice, who was from a prominent Macedonian family. At the wedding, according to the historian Plutarch, Cleopatra's uncle made comments about legitimate heirs, which offended Alexander. An argument broke out. Alexander and his mother left Macedon, though they later returned. In October 336 BC, during a festival, Philip was assassinated by one of his bodyguards, Pausanias. The assassin was immediately killed by Philip's other bodyguards. The actual motive remains debated by historians. Some ancient sources suggested involvement by Olympias or even Alexander, but there's no conclusive evidence either way. What is clear is that Alexander, at age 20, became king of Macedon. Chapter 2. Consolidating Power and Early Campaigns. Alexander's first challenge was securing his position. Several rival claimants to the throne were eliminated, though the exact details and Alexander's direct involvement are unclear in the sources. When word of Philip's death spread, some Greek city-states saw an opportunity to break free from Macedonian control. Thebes, which had been garrisoned by Macedonian troops, revolted in 335 BC. Alexander marched south with his army. What happened next is well documented. Alexander besieged Thebes and, after the city fell, ordered it destroyed. According to ancient historians, Approximately 6,000 Thebans were killed, and around 30,000 were sold into slavery. Only temples and the house of the poet Pindar were left standing. The destruction of Thebes served as a warning to other Greek cities considering rebellion. With Greece secured, Alexander turned his attention to Persia. The Persian Empire was the superpower of the era, controlling territory from Egypt through Mesopotamia to Central Asia and parts of India. In spring 334 BC, Alexander crossed the Hellespont into Asia Minor, with an army ancient sources number at around 40,000 infantry and 5,000 cavalry. The exact numbers are debated by modern historians, but it was significantly smaller than the forces available to the Persian Empire. The first major engagement was the Battle of Granicus River in May 334 BC. Persian satraps had gathered forces to stop Alexander's invasion. Ancient sources describe Alexander personally leading a cavalry charge across the river. During the fighting, Alexander's helmet was struck and damaged. A Persian commander nearly killed him before being cut down by one of Alexander's officers. Alexander won the battle, but the historical accounts make clear it was a close fight, where he personally faced mortal danger. Over the following year, Alexander moved through Asia Minor, taking cities through siege or negotiation. In November 333 BC, he met the Persian king Darius III at the Battle of Issus, fought in a narrow coastal plain in what is now southern Turkey. The accounts state that Darius had the larger army, but couldn't effectively use his numbers in the confined space. Alexander's forces broke through the Persian lines. Darius withdrew from the battlefield, leaving behind his family members who were captured by Alexander. Ancient sources say Alexander treated them respectfully. However, modern historians note that most surviving accounts come from sources favorable to Alexander. Persian perspectives are largely lost. After Issus, instead of pursuing Darius immediately, Alexander spent from 333 to 332 BC securing the Mediterranean coast. The siege of Tyre lasted 7 months, from January to July 332 BC. It was a difficult operation. Tyre was built on an island, requiring Alexander to construct a causeway under enemy fire. When the city finally fell, ancient sources report that 8,000 defenders were killed and about 30,000 inhabitants were sold into slavery. Alexander then moved into Egypt, which had been under Persian control. The Egyptians, unhappy with Persian rule, welcomed Alexander. He was crowned pharaoh and founded the city of Alexandria in 331 BC, which would become one of the most important cities in the ancient world. During his time in Egypt, Alexander made a journey to the Siwa oasis to consult the oracle of Amun. Ancient sources disagree on what happened there, but after this visit, Alexander began emphasizing his connection to divinity, which caused some tension with his Macedonian officers. In October 331 BC, Alexander faced Darius again at the Battle of Gaugamela in what is now northern Iraq. Ancient sources give varying numbers, but Darius's army was substantially larger than Alexander's force. The battle was hard fought. Darius had assembled war chariots and cavalry. Alexander's infantry maintained formation and created gaps to let the chariots through. Alexander then led a cavalry charge toward Darius's position. Darius withdrew from the battlefield, and his army collapsed. After Gaugamela, Alexander occupied the major Persian cities of Babylon, Susa, Persepolis, and Pasargadae. In Persepolis, the royal palace was burned. Ancient sources disagree on whether this was deliberate policy or the result of drunken celebration that got out of control. Darius fled east, but was assassinated by his own nobles in 330 BC. Alexander claimed the Persian throne and began adopting Persian customs, including Persian royal dress and court ceremonies. This created friction with his Macedonian companions, who viewed these practices as foreign and inappropriate. The cultural tensions came to a head in 328 BC. At a banquet in Maracanda in Central Asia, Alexander and one of his senior officers, Clytus the Black, had an argument. Both men had been drinking. According to ancient sources, Clytus criticized Alexander for adopting Persian ways and for taking too much personal credit for victories that Philip had made possible. The argument escalated. Alexander grabbed a spear or pike and killed Clytus. This is one of the few episodes where nearly all ancient sources agree on the basic facts. Alexander immediately regretted the killing and reportedly spent days in grief. But the damage was done. The incident demonstrated that Alexander could be violent and unpredictable when drinking. His officers had to be more careful around him. In 327 BC, a conspiracy against Alexander was discovered among his pages, the young nobles who served in his court. The conspirators were executed. Alexander also had his official historian, Callisthenes, arrested on suspicion of involvement. Callisthenes died in custody, either executed or from illness. From 327 to 326 BC, Alexander campaigned in what is now Pakistan and northwestern India. He crossed the Hindu Kush Mountains and fought several battles against local rulers. The most significant battle was against King Porus at the Hydaspes River in 326 BC. Porus had a large force that included war elephants, which were terrifying to soldiers and horses who had never encountered them before. Alexander won the battle through a combination of tactics and river-crossing maneuvers, but it was costly. According to tradition, Alexander's horse Bucephalus died either during or shortly after this battle. The horse was around 30 years old. After defeating Porus, Alexander wanted to continue east toward the Ganges River valley. But at the Hyphasis River, his army refused to go further. Ancient sources describe a meeting where Alexander's officers, particularly Coenus, argued that the troops had been campaigning for 8 years, were far from home, and wanted to return. Alexander reportedly sulked in his tent for 3 days, but his army would not change their decision. This is a documented case where Alexander's will was overruled by his own forces. He had to turn back. For the return journey, Alexander divided his forces. He sent part of the army back by a northern route, and part by sea. Alexander himself led a force through the Gedrosian Desert, in what is now southern Pakistan and Iran. This march, undertaken in 325 BC, was a disaster. Ancient sources describe extreme heat, lack of water, flash floods, and terrible losses. The historian Arrian, writing centuries later but using earlier sources, suggests that Alexander may have been trying to match or exceed the achievements of legendary figures who had crossed the same desert. Estimates of casualties vary widely in ancient sources, but modern historians agree the losses were severe. Some ancient accounts suggest that more soldiers died in this march than in all of Alexander's battles combined. The decision to take this route is considered by historians to be one of Alexander's major strategic errors. Alexander returned to Babylon in 323 BC and began planning new campaigns, possibly into Arabia. But in June 323 BC, he fell ill after a prolonged drinking party. Ancient sources describe a fever that lasted approximately 11 days. Alexander gradually lost the ability to speak. On June 10th or 11th, 323 BC, he died. He was 32 years old. The cause of death is unknown. Ancient sources mention fever and suggest various possibilities. Modern historians have proposed malaria, typhoid fever, liver disease from heavy drinking, or poisoning, but there's no way to know for certain. Alexander left no clear succession plan. When asked who should inherit, he allegedly said, "the strongest," though this may be apocryphal. He had a half-brother with intellectual disabilities, and a son born after his death, but neither could effectively rule. Within years, his empire fragmented, as his generals fought each other for control. Alexander's wife Roxana and son were eventually murdered. The unified empire Alexander created did not survive him. So, was Alexander really invincible? In terms of set-piece battles where he commanded, the historical record shows he did not lose. He won at Granicus, Issus, Gaugamela, Hydaspes, and other engagements. However, this doesn't mean he faced no setbacks. He nearly died at Granicus. The siege of Tyre took 7 months of difficult fighting. The Indian campaign showed the limits of his army's endurance. His troops mutinied and refused his orders at the Hephaestus River. His decision to march through the Gedrosian Desert resulted in catastrophic casualties. Why, then, is he remembered as great? Several factors contributed to this reputation. First, Alexander brought historians and record-keepers on his campaigns. The accounts we have largely come from sources favorable to him. Persian and other opposing viewpoints were mostly lost. Second, Alexander was genuinely skilled as a military tactician and showed personal courage, often fighting in the front lines. This impressed ancient writers. Third, his conquests were geographically impressive. He created the largest contiguous empire the world had seen up to that point. Fourth, the Hellenistic kingdoms that emerged from his empire's breakup continued to venerate him, spreading Greek culture across a vast area. This cultural influence lasted for centuries, but the historical Alexander was more complex than the legend. He was capable of both strategic brilliance and serious errors. He could be generous to defeated enemies, but also ordered massacres. He inspired loyalty, but also fear. He achieved remarkable military success, but also made decisions that killed thousands of his own soldiers unnecessarily. The real story of Alexander shows us something important about history. The legends we inherit are often shaped by who wrote them down and what they wanted people to remember. When we look at the actual evidence, we usually find something more complicated and more human than the myth. If you enjoyed this look at the historical facts behind the legend, subscribe to this channel for more deep dives into what really happened in history. Hit the like button if you learned something new today. Drop a comment below and tell me which historical figure or event you'd like us to investigate next. Should we look at Julius Caesar? Genghis Khan? The real story of the Trojan War? And if you want to see another video about military history and how legends are made, click the video appearing on your screen right now.